Most of what we're doing to evolve spiritually is actually keeping us trapped in the very box that we are trying to escape from. And I wasted nearly a decade of my life going deeper into that trap before I stumbled upon something that finally set me free. And God, I was such a spiritual tryhard. I had spent thousands on retreats, coaching, energy readings, facilitations, trying to find that missing piece or find more things to heal about myself. And I was that guy, right? I was that guy thinking I was so evolved while completely being stuck in my own head. And the crazy thing is, despite all of this work, I was still operating as the same old Kevin, just with fancier problems or language to describe my problems, okay? Because I would sit there visualizing my higher self while still being completely identified with the smaller version of me. It was like I was beautifying my prison cell and calling it freedom, right? It's still a prison. Then about 2 years ago, I hit this weird breaking point, and I was in meditation one day when I just broke. Not in a bad way, but something just cracked wide open. I realized I'd been spending years trying to become something I already was. I wasn't Kevin trying to reach some higher state. No, I was already that higher state experiencing itself as Kevin. And man, did that hit me. Because it wasn't some complicated technique that got me there. It was this simple but massive shift in perspective that I started calling identity frequency mapping. Not because it sounds cool, though it kind of does, but because it's literally about remapping who you think you are back to who you've always been. And the first time I really dropped into this, I was sitting on my couch. I wasn't even meditating, right? I was just watching Netflix. Then suddenly the boundaries between me just dissolved. I don't mean that in an abstract way, but if you've taken psychedelics, you just kind of like dissolve. I mean, physically felt it in my sense of self expand beyond my body. That's what it felt like while watching Netflix, okay? Like that. Not because I was trying, because I wasn't in the way anymore, okay? And about a month later, I was making coffee one morning when this solution to one of my business problems that I had banged my head against for months, it just appeared, like fully formed, like the solution was just there. Not because I figured it out, but because from this bigger perspective, it wasn't even a problem to begin with. And that's when I realized this isn't just some spiritual experience, but this is a completely different way of operating in the world. So as I started sharing this with other people sharing it with other people, something weird happened. Folks who had been meditating for decades were having massive breakthroughs in just one session. Not because what I was sharing was so advanced, no, but because it was actually simpler than all of these complicated spiritual stuff that they had been doing. Because it was about remembering, not becoming something. Okay, it was about remembering, returning to. Now here's the thing about manifestation. We are not creating anything new, right? How many times have we heard that? You are not creating anything new in manifestation. You are just remembering who you really are beyond all of the stories and limitations, and then letting life flow through you, that remembering. Okay? It's not about Kevin trying to manifest stuff, but it's about something much bigger expressing itself through Kevin. This is groundbreaking, okay? Listen carefully. Have you ever felt like despite all your meditation and spiritual work, you are basically the same person with the same problems? Have you noticed how manifestation still feels like work rather than your natural state? What if you're not actually missing some advanced technique, but just forgotten something fundamental about who you really are? And I'm here to remind you. I am here to remind you. So this is going to be a big one. Please take some notes, pop open a bottle of wine, and let's do this together, because I'm going to break down exactly what identity frequency mapping is, why it works better than any approaches, and why other approaches fail, and how you can actually start using it today to completely transform your experience of reality. Okay? Not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you've always been. Okay? Remembering who you've always been. And let's start with what I call the amnesia of separation. Sounds cool, right? Amnesia of separation. But here's the deal. We've all forgotten who we really are. And I don't mean that in some vague spiritual way. I mean we have literally forgotten that we are infinite consciousness having temporary human experience. Think about it. For the moment that we were born, you are taught to identify with your body, your personality, your collection of thoughts and emotions. Okay, we've been given a name, we've been told that we are separate from everything else, and then we spend our entire lives trying to protect and enhance this separate self. we protect and enhance our separate self. That is like being handed the shittiest video game character with the worst stats and being told, this is you forever, good luck. And then we spend decades trying to level up this character, not realizing we are actually the player outside of the screen, not character inside the screen. Okay? We are the player outside of the screen, not the character inside. And here's what I found with people who've invested heavily in personal development but still feel stuck, right? Listen carefully. They know all the concepts intellectually, but they are still operating from the same fundamental identity. They've read all the books, done all the courses, but they are still approaching transformation as a separate self trying to improve. Whew. Right? One of my clients, Tucker, doubled her business revenue in just 6 weeks after one identity frequency mapping session. Not because she learned some new business strategy, but because she stopped identifying as someone who had struggled to succeed. See the difference? The crazy part was we weren't even focusing on money during our work together. She wanted to heal her relationship with her parents, which she did on top of that. The money was just a bonus. So, the first step to an identity frequency mapping is recognizing that you are not who you think you are. You are not this separate self trying to manifest a better life. You are the infinite consciousness that is manifesting this entire reality, including the character you call you. And this is not some spiritual bypass, okay? This is actually the most practical approach to transformation I have ever found. Because listen, when you stop identifying with the limited self, you stop being limited by its patterns, beliefs, and history. Whew. Who likes that? Who wants a piece of that? Now, let's talk about your beautiful breath, okay? Not just any breath, but the specific breathing patterns in identity frequency mapping that dissolve the illusion of separation from source. Our breath is the only autonomic function in our body that we can consciously control. Think about that. We cannot willfully change our heart rate, our digestion, our hormone production directly. But your breath, you can control that. That makes your breath the sacred bridge between your conscious and your unconscious mind, between your limited identity and your infinite nature, your true nature. When you breathe in a specific pattern, aka coherent breathing, something interesting happens, something fascinating happens. Your heart and brain synchronize, your nervous system shifts from fight or flight, aka sympathetic nervous system, to parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. And most importantly, the boundaries between your separate self begin to dissolve. You are now shifting identities, okay? Or returning back to your oneness, to your true self. Now, here's what's happening physiologically. When you breathe into this coherent pattern, about 5 seconds in, slight pause, and 5 seconds out, your heart rate variability increases. And here's the secret. The key is not how long you count the inhale or exhale, but it's how relaxed you can get, okay? Because it is an experience for your body, not your mind. Because this sends a signal to your brain that it is safe, you are safe now. And when your brain knows you're safe, it stops reinforcing the boundaries of your separate self. And I had 2 clients who had been meditating for decades, okay? They experienced their first genuine non-dual state just by breathing this way for a few minutes. Not because they were trying to reach some elevated state, no, but because they were allowing their natural state to emerge. See the difference there? Like one of my clients, Ashley, after a week of working together, she experienced a spontaneous healing during a simple 20-minute self-love meditation, right? Dr. Joe's Go Love meditation, to be specific. The funny thing was, we were focusing on abundance, not healing, okay? That is what the surprise of the universe is like. Which brings us to the second key to identity frequency mapping, is that using your breath as the sacred bridge back to your infinite nature, not as a technique to get somewhere, but as a remembrance of who you already are. Okay, not as a technique to get somewhere, but as a remembering. Now, let's talk about why remembering your infinite self is more powerful than healing your current identity. You got to listen carefully for this. This is high level shit. Most personal development approaches are based on the idea of healing. Let me talk about your problems so we can heal them, okay? Do this to heal your limiting beliefs. Try this technique to heal your inner child. But here's a fundamental flaw in this approach. Well, it is reinforcing the idea that something needs healing, which is a complete lie. There is nothing that needs to be healed because you are already whole. However, obviously we encounter traumas and maybe some bruises along the way, but all we need to do is simply overcome the emotion and you will return back to your infinite nature. See the difference there? That is it. The problem with the becoming approach or healing approach is that it creates a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that gap itself generates resistance, struggle, the yo-yo results that so many people experience. And I see this all the time with clients who have tried everything, right? They've tried therapy, past life regressions, plant medicine, all type of weird shit, right? Everything, literally everything. Why? Because they are approaching manifestation from their current identity, trying to become something else. Identity frequency mapping flips that completely. Instead of becoming, it's about remembering. Remembering that you are already the infinite consciousness that can express itself as anything. The infinite consciousness that can express itself as anything. And here is why remembering is more powerful than healing. When you are trying to heal something, you're operating from lack. You are saying, I don't have this yet, but I'm trying to get it. But when you are remembering, you are operating from wholeness. You are saying, this is who I already am. I just forgot for a moment. Massive difference. Massive difference. Think about it like amnesia, right? If you forgot you were a millionaire, you might struggle working minimum wage jobs, trying to become wealthy. But if someone showed you your bank account and you remembered, you'd instantly shift on how you operate in the world, okay? Not because you became something new, but because you remembered who you already were. That is exactly what happened with one of my clients, Abhinav. If you haven't seen his testimonial, please go watch it. But he had been doing Dr. Joe Dispenza's Tuning into New Potentials meditation for 160 days or something like that, with minimal results, right? He would have something here and there, but nothing drastic. After one session of identity frequency mapping, he received an unexpected $300,000 within just 10 days. Not because he manifested it, but because he stopped trying to manifest and started operating from his natural state of abundance. So, the third key to identity frequency mapping is shifting from becoming to remembering, from trying to create a new identity to recognizing your infinite nature that is already present. And I want to talk about coherence, how heart-brain synchronization creates the exact frequency needed to access your infinite nature. How many times have you heard that before, right? Your heart is the bridge to your infinite nature. Your brain and heart are constantly communicating, sending electromagnetic signals back and forth. Most of the time, they are not in sync. Your heart is doing its thing, okay? Your brain is also doing its thing. However, there is some kind of dissonance between them, right? But when your heart and brain are synchronized, this is what scientists call coherence. Let me tell you, not only something amazing happens, but it feels fucking awesome. All right? The electromagnetic field generated by our heart expands and becomes more organized. And this coherent field is the gateway to your infinite nature. It is us, okay? And research from the HeartMath Institute shows that your heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends it's huge, beyond your body. When you are in a state of coherence, this field becomes more powerful and more organized, okay? Think of it like this. Your heart is broadcasting on a certain frequency all the time. Okay, I'm going to say that again because you need to tattoo that into your heart. Your heart is broadcasting on a certain frequency all the time. When you are stressed, anxious, or identified with your separate self, that frequency is chaotic and limited. But let me tell you, when you are coherent, that frequency becomes clear and expanded. And here's the wild part. This coherent frequency is the exact resonance needed to access what quantum physicists call the field of all possibilities. It's like tuning a radio to exactly the right station, then click, you now hear the music clearly. Because your beautiful body is an instrument. Simply as that. Now align that instrument to life. And I had a client, Amethyst, who described feeling a release of heaviness and a recalibrated energy field after one session of identity frequency mapping. And let me tell you, within 3 weeks, well, we kept stacking the sessions. Within 3 weeks of sessions with me, she met someone she felt completely connected to. And her friends were noticing her changes in her life as well. Not because she was trying to attract a relationship, but because she was operating from coherence. Okay, see the difference there? Now, the fourth key to identity frequency mapping is establishing heart-brain coherence, okay? Not as a technique to get somewhere, but as the natural gateway to your quantum essence. Now, listen carefully. I want to talk about transcending the personality construct, okay? And why identity frequency mapping takes you beyond who you think you are into infinite awareness. Because your personality, what psychologists call our ego structure, okay? There is so many names for these things, but yeah. Different schools of thought for the same concepts. Let's call it the ego structure for the sake of this video. Anyway, it is essentially a collection of memories, beliefs, habits, and patterns that you've identified with. That is our ego structure. It is like a character in a play that you've been performing for so long that you have forgotten that you are the actor. Now listen to this. I was supposed to play the role of obedient son who becomes a doctor or nurse. Okay, I'm Filipino. Instead, I went off script and became a guide who talks about quantum consciousness. All right, I'm not a guru. Don't think of me as a guru. I'm just a guide. My family is still waiting for me to get back onto original script so I can become a doctor or a nurse. Sorry, mom and dad. Anyway, don't show my mom and dad this video. But here's the thing. Your personality is not who you are. It is a construct, a useful fiction that allows infinite consciousness to have a human experience. The problem is that we've mistaken the character for the actor. So, what I do in identity frequency mapping is it helps you recognize that you are not your personality. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions or the story you tell about yourself. But you are the awareness in which all things appear. Okay? This isn't about rejecting your personality. Don't get me wrong. Or it's not about becoming some blank zombie. Okay? No, it's about recognizing that your personality is like a vehicle you are driving. It's not who you are. It is just the vehicle you are driving. You can still enjoy driving it, but you don't freak out when it gets a scratch. Now, when you transcend the personality construct, something amazing happens. You stop being driven by unconscious patterns and start operating from conscious choice. You can still use your personality when it's useful, but you are no longer confined by it or you don't identify with it. How cool is that? Now, the fifth key to identity frequency mapping is transcending the personality construct, not by rejecting it, but by recognizing that it's just one expression of your infinite nature. One expression of your infinite nature. Now, let's talk about neurobiological reset. Okay, neurobiological reset. How your brain literally reorganizes itself to accommodate the remembrance of your infinite nature. Okay, your brain will reorganize the remembrance of your infinite nature. Listen. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on your experiences, thoughts, and beliefs moment after moment. And this is called neuroplasticity. And when you consistently operate from your infinite nature rather than your limited identity, your brain physically changes. When you practice identity frequency mapping, several key neurological changes occur. First, your default mode network, the part of your brain associated with self-referential thinking, it becomes less active. Okay? You don't reference the self into everything. You don't make it about you for everything. So this is a network that maintains your sense of separate self. Got that? Secondly, it increases coherence between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system. Okay, your rational brain and your emotional brain start working together instead of fighting each other. And third is there's a shift from beta brainwaves associated with normal waking consciousness to alpha and theta states. Okay, brainwave states, which are associated with flow states and access to your subconscious mind, aka your body. These neurological changes aren't just temporary, but with consistent practice, they become your new baseline. Who wants a new baseline, right? Who the fucking wants to be anxious, grumpy, depressed all the time? Who wants to have a baseline that manifestation doesn't work for them? Stop. And I had a client who described it like this. Like her brain was a computer running an outdated operating system. However, identity frequency mapping was like installing a completely new operating system that allowed her to run programs that couldn't even open before. And so, the sixth key to identity frequency mapping is allowing its neurobiological reset to occur. Okay, not by forcing it, but by consistently operating from your infinite nature and letting your brain reorganize accordingly. So, let's talk about why sitting in silence isn't enough to break the amnesia of separation, and how we need to move from meditation to remembrance. Now, don't get me wrong, I love meditating. Okay, I'm not saying that it's not valuable. It's valuable. I love it. I do it 3 hours every single day, okay? Whatever. That's how much I love it. It can reduce stress. It can increase focus. It creates space between you and your thoughts. It can be used to manifest. However, traditional meditation often doesn't address the fundamental misidentification at the core of our suffering. The real issue is that we've forgotten who we are. And simply sitting in silence watching your thoughts doesn't necessarily remind you of that. In fact, it can reinforce the idea that you are the observer, separate from your thoughts, which is still a form of duality. Now, identity frequency mapping takes meditation to the next level by adding the element of remembrance. So instead of just observing your experience, you are recognizing the infinite awareness that makes all experiences possible. And so this is the difference between watching a movie and realizing you are the screen on which the movie appears. Okay, the screen doesn't get caught up in the drama of the movie because it knows it's just projections of light. Let's just say that. I had a client who had been meditating for, I think, 20 years, they told me. She would sit in silence for hours, but she was still struggling with the same patterns in her life. And after a couple of identity frequency mapping sessions, she said, I've been meditating all this time, but I never realized I was trying to fix something that was never broken. You're not broken. You are not broken. You don't need fixing. You don't need healing. You just need to remember. Return back to your infinite nature. And my parents would always say, if meditation is not working, you're not doing it right. Try harder. But that's exactly the problem. Trying harder from your separate self only reinforces your separate self. It's not about trying harder. It's about recognizing who's doing the trying. Who's trying? Who's trying hard? So the seventh key to identity frequency mapping is moving from meditation to remembrance, from observing your experience to recognizing the infinite awareness that you are. Okay? Now, let's get nerdy for a sec and let's talk about the electromagnetic signature of wholeness. How your heart's field expands exponentially when you reconnect to your infinite self. And as I mentioned earlier, your heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your body. But what I didn't mention is that the field changes dramatically when you shift from your limited identity to your infinite nature. When you are operating from your limited identity, your heart's electromagnetic field is relatively weak and disorganized, okay? But when you reconnect to your infinite self, this field becomes stronger and so much more coherent. And here's where it gets really interesting. This expanded electromagnetic field, it doesn't just affect you. Okay, listen to this. It affects everything and everyone around you. It affects everything and everyone around you, including you. Research shows that your heart's field can influence other people's brainwaves from several feet away. Okay? Just like when someone walks into the room, you can feel their energy, you can feel their state of being before they even say something. And this also explains why some people often have spontaneous breakthroughs just by being in the presence of someone who's operating from their infinite nature. Your coherent field is literally entraining their field into a higher order. I've had clients report that their relationships improved dramatically after our work together. Not because they were doing anything differently or even having hard conversations with them, no. But because their electromagnetic signature had changed and people were responding to their energy, not what they were saying. Okay, stay with me. We're nearly done. The eighth key to identity frequency mapping is recognizing and amplifying the electromagnetic signature of wholeness, not by trying to change your energy, but by operating from your infinite nature and letting your energy change accordingly. Okay? So, let's talk about breaking free from the matter to matter manifestation trap. Ooh, listen carefully to this. This is awesome. breaking free from the matter-to-matter manifestation trap to access the infinite field of possibilities beyond linear causality. Okay? Now, most manifestation approaches are based on the matter-to-matter model. Okay? You can visualize something, matter, take action, matter, then get results, matter. It's linear. Okay? It's cause and effect approach that operates within the constraints of space and time. Okay, this is good if we're operating in 3D reality, but when you are in a meditative state, that is a different reality altogether, different consciousness. The problem with the matter-to-matter approach is that it is incredibly limited. You can only manifest what you can conceive of based on your past experiences and your current beliefs. Plus, it takes a lot of time and effort and struggle. Now, identity frequency mapping operates on a completely different model, what I call consciousness to matter. Instead of trying to manipulate reality from within reality, you're shifting the consciousness from which reality emerges. Think of it like this. If you are in a dream trying to manifest a better dream experience, you are limited by the dream rules. Okay? But if you wake up and realize you are the dreamer, you can change the entire dream instantly. Okay? Now, the ninth key to identity frequency mapping is breaking free from the matter-to-matter manifestation trap, not by trying harder to manifest, but by shifting the consciousness from which manifestation occurs. Which leads us to surrender. Okay? Why letting go during activations or meditation accelerates remembrance more than spiritual seeking ever could. Okay? This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of identity frequency mapping. Because we have been taught that transformation requires effort, discipline, and consistent practice. Okay? All while those things can be valuable, they can also reinforce the very identity that you are trying to transcend. So, it is like my experience with family gatherings. Okay? The harder I try to impress everyone with my accomplishments, the more awkward and inauthentic I feel. But when I'm just relaxed and just being myself, suddenly everyone's laughing, everyone's having a good time. Well, except for that one uncle who still asks when I'm getting a real job. Let's just say that. Now, the surrender paradox is this. The more you try to reach your infinite nature, the more you reinforce your separate self who is doing the trying. But when you surrender, when you let go of all effort, okay? When you let go of all effort, your infinite nature reveals itself effortlessly. How cool is that? How easy is that? This is why the activation phase of identity frequency mapping emphasizes surrender rather than effort. It's not about trying to reach some elevated state. It's about letting go of the one who is trying. Okay? Letting go of the one who is trying. Please remember that. I had a client who described her experience like this. I'd been seeking spiritual awakening for decades, pushing and striving. But the moment of complete surrender, when I stopped trying to go anywhere, everything I'd been seeking suddenly was present. How counterintuitive is that? Because surrender isn't passive or resigned. It's an active letting go of control, of knowing, of being the one who's in charge of your transformation. I'm not in charge of my transformation. My infinite nature is. It's recognizing that your infinite nature is already present and your efforts to reach it are actually obscuring it. And let me tell you, my parents would be horrified. They would be like, what the fuck happened to this guy? What do you mean surrender? Never surrender. Fight hard. But this is not about giving up. It's about recognizing that the fighter is the very thing standing in the way of what you are fighting for. So, the 10th key to identity frequency mapping is remembrance, the surrender paradox. Okay, not by trying to surrender, but by recognizing that surrender happens naturally when you stop trying to be someone you are not. Now, let's talk about living from infinity. Living from an infinity, which are practical techniques to maintain your connection to source consciousness during everyday challenges. Now, it is one thing to access your infinite nature during meditation or activation. It is another thing entirely to maintain that connection when your boss is being a dick, when your kids are screaming at you, when that negotiation didn't go as according to plan, or when you're stuck in traffic. It is like when I visit my relatives and maintain my zen for about 15 minutes before someone asks why I'm not married yet. And suddenly, I'm 12 years old again. You know what I'm talking about? I'm defensive, I'm irritated. However, Living from infinity doesn't mean you never get triggered or face challenges. No, it means you have practical tools to quickly return to your infinite nature when you temporarily forgot. That's it. I still forget. Everyone forgets. My clients forget. Lots of people forget, right? However, they have tools to return back to their infinite nature. Now, write this down. The first technique is what I call coherent breathing on demand. When you notice you've contracted or you've identified with your separate self again, simply take a couple of coherent breaths, 5 seconds in, pause, 5 seconds out. Get as relaxed as possible. This immediately shifts your nervous system and reminds you of your infinite nature. Okay, that's the first one. Second one is the infinite perspective shift. When you are facing a challenge, like literally in front of your face, ask yourself, how would my infinite self perceive this situation? This instantly broadens your perspective and reveals solutions that weren't visible from your limited identity. How easy is that? Third is embodied remembrance. Now, this involves physically feeling the qualities of your infinite nature: expansiveness, peace, love, freedom, generosity in your body, not as an idea, but as a felt experience. This anchors your infinite nature in your physical experience. And I had a client who was going through a difficult divorce, and she was practicing these techniques daily. And she said, "Oh my God, Kev, for the first time, I can be in the same room with my ex without getting emotionally hijacked. I'm responding from my infinite nature rather than reacting from my wounds." And so the 11th key to identity frequency mapping is developing practical techniques to live from infinity, not as spiritual bypassing, but as genuine remembrance of your true nature, even in challenging circumstances. Now, let's talk about the measurable shift documented cases of spontaneous healing, synchronistic opportunities, and reality shifts after remembering your true nature, okay? Because identity frequency mapping isn't just about feeling good or having nice spiritual experiences, but it creates tangible, measurable changes in physical reality. So I want to share some documented cases. First, spontaneous healings. Okay, I've had clients report significant improvements in chronic conditions after working together. One woman described she was like low energy all the time, chronic fatigue, improving dramatically within days. Another person reported that long-standing digestive issues resolved without any changes to her diet or medication. Okay, you can hear these stories in a SoundCloud link that I will link in the description. But then there are also synchronistic opportunities, right? The client who received another unexpected 300K, another client who was offered equity in a medtech company after not speaking to the founders for more than 2 years. I also had a client who had suddenly had multiple job offers after months of searching with no results, right? All can be found in my testimonial page. Now, perhaps the most fascinating things are the reality shifts, which is changes in how reality itself seems to operate. I've had clients report that things that used to be difficult now become effortless, like creating content, like serving their clients, like working their job better, like they were assistant for some high executives. It is now more tolerable. People who are more resistant become more supportive. I even had one client describe it as like, it's as if the universe was rearranging itself to match my internal state. I didn't have to make anything happen. It just unfolded naturally. Wouldn't you want to live like that? It's pretty cool. So the 12th key to identity frequency mapping is recognizing and appreciating the measurable shifts in your reality, not as validation that you're doing it right, but as natural expressions of your infinite nature. Now, as we move along, let's talk about getting beyond that seeking mind, okay? How identity frequency mapping ends the spiritual search by bringing you home to yourself. So no more seeking. There is no more seeking because you are returning home to yourself. The spiritual search is a strange paradox, because the more you seek, the more you reinforce the idea that you are seeking. What you are seeking isn't already here. So the very act of seeking creates the experience of not having found, okay, something that needs to be sought after. Most spiritual seekers are caught in this endless cycle of seeking. They go from teacher to teacher, technique to technique, experience to experience, always looking for that next breakthrough, that final piece of the puzzle. Identity frequency mapping ends this cycle by revealing what you've been seeking, your infinite nature. It's been present all along. It's been present all along. It is not something to attain. It is what we already are beneath the layers of forgetting. And when the seeking mind relaxes, something amazing happens. The present moment opens up in a completely different way. And that is why we call it the generous present moment. It opens up. There is no longer any need to get somewhere else or become someone else. There's just the fullness of what already is. And that is the beautiful paradox when you stop seeking. You actually become more effective in the world. Not because you are trying to achieve something, but because you are operating from the infinite intelligence that you are. So, the key to identity frequency mapping is going beyond the seeking mind, okay? Not by trying to stop seeking, but by recognizing that what you've been seeking is what has been present all along. Whew. How cool is that? I want everyone to experience this. I want everyone to come home to themselves. Now let's talk about the ultimate integration. When your infinite nature becomes your lived experience rather than just a meditation concept. This is where the shit gets real, okay? It's one thing to have a glimpse of your infinite nature during meditation or an activation. It's another thing entirely to have it become your baseline, your lived experience in every moment. Now, the ultimate integration happens when your infinite nature stops being so a special experience and starts being your normal state. Okay, you don't no longer need to access it because you are no longer leaving it. You are just it. You are one with it. Now, listen carefully. This doesn't mean you never get triggered or temporarily forget. You still do. I still do. It means that remembrance becomes increasingly effortless and automatic. The gaps between forgetting and remembering get shorter and shorter. And for me, at first, I would remember my infinite nature, maybe once a day, usually during meditation and a couple of minutes afterwards. Now, it's just my default state. If I forget, it's only a few short moments before I naturally return. The ultimate integration also means that your infinite nature expresses itself through your personality rather than being obscured by your personality. Which means your uniqueness, your authenticity becomes a vehicle for the infinite rather than a limitation. How cool is that? So the 14th key to identity frequency mapping is allowing the ultimate integration to occur, not by forcing it, but by consistently remembering your infinite nature until remembering becomes your natural state. And finally, the cherry on top. Let's talk about moving from fragmentation to wholeness. How remembering your infinite self heals the artificial divisions between all aspects of life. And one of the most craziest effects of identity frequency mapping is the dissolution of the artificial boundaries we create between different areas of our life. Work versus personal, spiritual versus practical, spirit versus the world, mind versus body, self versus other. But your infinite nature doesn't recognize these divisions. It's whole, it's unified and integrated. And when you operate from this wholeness, the fragmentation in your life naturally heals. See the difference? This healing of fragmentation extends to all areas of your life. Relationships become expressions of your infinite nature rather than sources of validation. Work becomes a channel for your gifts rather than just a way to make money. Health becomes a natural expression of your wholeness rather than a battle against disease. And perhaps the most profoundly is the boundary between self and other begins to dissolve. Okay, what you see in you and another person is one. You see oneness in everything. You see the divine in everything. Okay, you see your infinite nature in everyone, and you're recognizing everyone is the same infinite consciousness in everyone and everything, and that is the best. And so that is the final key to identity frequency mapping. Moving from fragmentation to wholeness, not by trying to connect the pieces of your life, but by recognizing the wholeness that is already present beneath the apparent divisions. And there you have it. Identity frequency mapping in all its glory. From the amnesia of separation to the remembrance of wholeness. From struggling to manifest to effortlessly expressing your infinite nature. If you have been investing in personal development but still feel stuck, if you know all the concepts but struggle to apply them consistently, if you experience yo-yo results and feel disconnected from your future self-identity, or you would love to remember who you are, then identity frequency mapping might be the exact thing that you've been looking for. Not because it's some advanced or new technique that will fix everything, finally fix you, but because it reminds you that you were never broken in the first place. You are not a limited self trying to become unlimited. You are infinite consciousness that temporarily forgot its true nature. Okay? You are infinite consciousness that temporarily forgot its true nature. My family still doesn't get what I do. At family gatherings, they introduce me as Kevin. He does something with meditation? Close enough, Mum. Thanks, Mum. I help people remember who they really are beyond the stories they tell about themselves. So like therapists. Okay, Mum. You can brag about that. So, if this resonates with you, I invite you to experience identity frequency mapping for yourself. Not because you need to be fixed or improved, but because remembering your infinite nature is the birthright of every being. The birthright of every being. And remember, this isn't about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you've always been. It's not about creating a better future, but it's about recognizing the infinite presence that you are right now.